Today for your reading lesson, we are going to be reading a story by the Brothers Grimm. And the Brothers Grimm are authors, and a lot of their stories have been turned into popular fairy tales and even movies like Sleeping Beauty, Hansel and Gretel, and even Cinderella is a version of one of Grimm's fairy tales. So that is the genre that we're reading. We've read poetry that authors write. We have read folk tales. We have read informational text. We have read fiction or fantasy stories. But today's story is a fairy tale. And in a fairy tale, there are usually imaginary creatures with special powers. And you'll see that in our story too. And there are mysterious adventures or events that happen. Yep, that's in our story today. And the story ends happily. Most fairy tales even end with the words, and they all lived happily ever after, right? So before we start reading, there are a couple of vocabulary words that I want to go over with you. One of the words is amazement. Can you say amazement? All right. Now, amazement means you are very surprised at something. Like when I wake up Christmas morning and I see my presents, I have a look of amazement on my face. I am very surprised by all the presents. Now, the other word is usual. And if it's usual, that means it happens a lot. I came to work this morning just like usual. I do it a lot. So it is usual. So another thing I want you to think about as I am reading, remember the question, we're reading about kindness and what it means to be kind. So I want you to think about the kindness that's occurring in the story. Now, I don't have any pictures. I am reading from my textbook here. So you'll just have to listen to the Elves and the Shoemaker. There are no illustrations. All right, so this is the Elves and the Shoemaker. It's by the Brothers Grimm, and it's retold by Emily Greggs and Bethany Martin. Sometimes the stories of the Brothers Grimm are retold in lots of different versions. So once upon a time, there lived a shoemaker. He worked very hard, but he was still very poor. At last, he had only one piece of leather. It was just enough to make one more pair of shoes. He cut the leather and put it on his table. "I will make the shoes in the morning," he said to his wife. The shoemaker and his wife went to sleep and slept peacefully through the night. In the morning, he went to his table. Here comes our vocabulary word. To his amazement, he was very surprised. The shoes were already made. The shoemaker did not know what to think. They were the finest shoes he had ever seen. Now remember, in a fairy tale, magical, unexplained things happen. Where did those shoes come from, right? The same day, a rich man came into the shop. "I like these shoes very much. They are just my size," said the man. "I will pay you a higher price than usual for them." And he gave the shoemaker 2 coins. All right, so he's going to pay a lot for that pair of shoes. The shoemaker used the 2 coins to buy leather for 2 more pairs of shoes. He cut the leather and then he went to bed. Now, here's where you can predict what might happen next. And we talked about predicting. Use what you know, use what's already happened in the story, and think about what might happen next. What is your prediction? In the morning, the shoemaker found 2 pairs of shoes already made. "Who is making these shoes?" said the shoemaker. "These are the best shoes I have ever seen." Now, what about your prediction? Did you predict that after he cut the leather, he went to bed, there would be 2 more pairs of shoes in the morning? That was my prediction. My prediction was confirmed. Soon, 2 customers came in and bought the shoes. They paid him 4 coins. The shoemaker bought leather for 4 more pairs of shoes. Just as before, he cut out the leather. In the morning, what do you think happened? What's your prediction? That's right, he found 4 more pairs of shoes. Soon 4 customers came in and bought the shoes, and so it went for some time. "I would like to stay up tonight," to see who was making those shoes, said the shoemaker. His wife liked that idea too, so they hid behind a curtain. They watched and they waited. At midnight, in came two little elves. They sat on the table and went right to work. They stitched and they sewed. The elves worked until all of the shoes were done. Then they were gone in a flash. All right, so there's our magical creatures, right? The elves that make this a fairy tale. The next day, the wife said, "These elves have been so kind to us. I want to do something kind for them. They need new clothes to keep them warm. I will make each of them pants, a shirt, and a little coat. And you can make each of them a pair of shoes." And then they went right to work. So did you hear our word kind in there? They said the elves have been so kind to them. Now they want to do something kind for the elves. That night, the shoemaker did not leave the leather on the table. Instead, he left the nice clothes and shoes instead. The shoemaker and his wife hid behind the curtain to see what the elves would do. At midnight, in came the two little elves. When they saw the clothes for them, they laughed and they hopped around the room. "Look how happy they are," the shoemaker whispered to his wife. The elves put on their clothes and skipped and danced. At last they danced out the door and were never seen again. And the kind shoemaker and his wife lived happily ever after. There's the other part that makes this a fairy tale. It ends happily. They all lived happily ever after. Now there's a couple of questions I want you to think about. How did the elves show kindness to the shoemaker? Right. They helped him make nice shoes, the finest shoes they had ever seen, right? Now, how did the elves' kindness help the shoemaker? Yes, that's right. He got to sell the shoes, make money, buy more leather so he could make more shoes. And remember, he was down to his last piece of leather. And then my last question for you is, how did the shoemaker and his wife show kindness to the elves? Yeah, they made them little pants and shirts and coats and shoes, right? So they returned their kindness. So this is not a question that you can probably answer, but I just want you to think about it and maybe talk about it with your big person. Is it better to receive or give kindness? Think about what happened in our story and talk about it with your big person. Is it better to give or receive kindness? All right. Now, before I let you go, remember our word amazement. Amazement means he was surprised. He came in there and he had a look of amazement when he saw somebody made the shoes in the middle of the night, right? And the other word was usual. Now, we said that it happens all the time if it's usual. Well, the rich man was willing to pay more than usual for the shoes. So he paid more than what happened all the time. All right. Good job today. And don't forget to think about that question. Is it better to give or receive kindness?